And the last topic of note is the update on tsunami hazard analysis. And this includes tsunamis originating from distant sources as well as near-source tsunamis that could be induced by underwater landslides. The studies were not complete at the time of our review, but are being pursued fairly actively and are to be documented by the PG&E's hazards assessment that's scheduled to be submitted to the NRC by March 15th of this year. And among other aspects, it's going to be including a three-dimensional modeling for the bottom motion of the seafloor. And obviously there's a connection here between tsunamis and earthquakes, too. And you gents are the experts on this. If you have anything more you want to say on that topic, other than the fact that this thing is nearing completion and we expect it to be completed by the middle of March.
I asked you this before, but maybe you should report publicly. You didn't get any specific detail about their results that would lead you to think that the hazard is way bigger than we had thought before, or maybe you didn't know, or what?
I hate to make a comment on that.
I mean, you just couldn't tell.
Yeah,
I mean, it was still preliminary, is that?
The answer is no. We are going to have to review carefully their analysis as well as the analysis in the Sewell report and assess the implications for safety. The major uncertainties have to do not with distant tsunamis caused by earthquakes far away, because the subduction zone type of fault zones are pretty far from here, but instead with potential landslide-induced tsunamis. And I think the principal questions relate to how large of an area could you have 40 miles of underwater landslide simultaneously,
just offshore,
mobilized. And in terms of the impact for the plant, if we basically there's credible possibilities that tsunamis can disable auxiliary salt water, even if they don't exceed the height of the snorkel. You can deposit debris,
right.
But that's not really something that is difficult to cope with at all, because there's so many diverse ways of continuing to provide cooling. Tsunamis in excess of 85 feet cause you to lose diesel generators. Tsunami, which again can be managed with the installed equipment and with the flex equipment. Tsunamis exceeding 140 feet will get your batteries. If you start to look at the inundation maps, you need to start to think about what's happening along the rest of the coast, because we're starting to talk. There's very little warning time for these because they're so close. The amount of time available to evacuate the low-lying areas along the coast here would be very short.
Like where we're sitting in this building.
And so, in my personal judgment, this is a very important topic to be studied in greater detail. I'm not sure whether the available information further offshore, we have detailed information close to shore, but in these areas where we're concerned about the potential for these landslides, we may not have sufficient information. If we don't, we need to understand this better, because it's not just the plant that is at risk, but the consequence along from here down through Pismo, and actually this sort of encompasses the entire California coast, could be very, very severe if there was not rapid response upon warning. And this means that this is a really important topic for everybody to be looking at in detail and understanding better the actual risk, and whether these very large areas are credibly can have landslides, or whether what's the smaller areas that have been observed in the Goleta and the historical landslide and tsunamis are more typical of what you should expect to have happen.
Now, did the fact-finding team have any discussion during this visit with PG&E on Dr. Sewell's report?
Not with Sewell's report.
No, not on Sewell's report, but it's recognized that is going to be the important thing to compare against the PG&E studies and their conclusions as well.
So, but did you make any inquiry as to whether or not PG&E was aware?
Oh, of course they're aware. I mean, they're aware, and they actually.
Of course, that study team is
right. And they showed us a map that shows Sewell's results and such. So they're already working with the report the Sewell report. But it's very important, and I think at this point, we, as a committee, don't have sufficient information to reach any conclusions.
So let me just summarize, and I read your draft fact-finding report. You had this meeting, you learned a lot, but in terms of the conclusions of their work...
We may not have learned
No,
all
wait,
that much.
we're not arguing. In terms of the conclusions of their work, they didn't tell you much because they're still not ready to... You were in December, and this thing is in March, and they're still working on it. That's what I was getting out of it.
You know, the thing is that we spend $1 billion a year for our Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and we spend $23 million a year through NOAA for the tsunami warning capabilities that we have along the coast here. And the tsunami threat, I think, can have comparable consequence in terms of damage to public health. And so this I think, particularly the understanding better the potential for landslide-induced tsunamis is really important, because to the extent that there may be substantive risk, we need to do something about it. It would be irresponsible for us not to put in place the capability to warn people that live in an area like this that if there's an earthquake, you just go right away, because there is some possibility that it might trigger something offshore, and 5 to 10 to 15, 20 minutes later,
You don't want to be in...
you don't. Everybody saw the photographs from Japan in terms of what tsunamis do when they're massive. And one of my former students is now the deputy general manager at the Onagawa station. He was there at the time. And fortunately, his family survived, but many of his coworkers lost their families because they were in the flood zone in Onagawa town. The lack of preparation was complete, not just at the nuclear plants. Their whole capability to warn and evacuate people appropriately was not there. And if we have a similar situation here, it's our responsibility to make sure that we take it seriously and that we consider safety of the populations around the plant, in addition to potential safety impacts for the plant itself.
Now, for the committee's record, I would like to acknowledge the contribution of Mr. David Weissman and his organization and Ms. Rochelle Becker in bringing to the committee's attention the existence of the Sewell report. Thank you for your effort.
Oh, yeah, so I have a comment about, I have a more general comment about this, which is, until now, the design basis for tsunamis out there was predicated on a very large tsunami that might come from across the ocean, you know, from Alaska, or, by the way, from Chile, or from somewhere in the Pacific. And that was how the plant was designed, and its design is robust against that, as demonstrated by this analysis they did many years ago. But at the time, they didn't contemplate the possibility of a tsunami coming from a just continental shelf slump that might be caused by an earthquake that would be nearby. Now, there are two distinctions, and Per made them both. I want to be sure I emphasize them here. The first is those things could be as large as the big ones coming from someplace very far away. But more to the point, if they're coming from Alaska, they've got 18 or even 30 hours of warning time, depending on where they are. There's lots of time. But there isn't any warning time from here. It might be 15 minutes. And that, I'm not talking about Pismo Beach. I'm sitting in this building right here. This is not a good place to be, all right? You know, it's right here. But I'm talking about the nuclear power plant. That's what we're supposed to worry about. The nuclear power plant doesn't have any warning either. And that changes the safety envelope. And here's why. Because they don't have, unless the earthquake exceeds a certain size, an automatic trip of that plant. The plant will trip automatically at a certain size earthquake, but not below that size. And that size earthquake was chosen, the one that trips the plant, based on considerations different from this. And they may want to come back and decide they want to trip the plant at a lower earthquake if it might cause this, even though it wouldn't have caused the other. And we're going to have to go and look at that carefully, and they will too. Because perhaps the way they've approached this isn't adequate for this particular threat, even though it might be adequate for, let's say, the earthquake threat itself. You know, to ride out the ground motion, fine, but it's no good for the tsunami. And so I know that they're going to look at this carefully with this in mind, because I've talked to them, and you did too. And we're going to have to review it and see what we come.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. You know, I, for one, am exceptionally appreciative of the effort of Mr. Weissman, because for so many years, when I've been sitting on this committee, every time tsunami issue came up, you know, I hear a lot of dismissal of the issue by saying, "Oh, don't worry." You know.
No, I don't. Hold on.
But what I'm saying now, there is another dimension to the inquiry that I will welcome.
Your characterization doesn't agree with mine. In 2008, PG&E on its own initiated a tsunami study under a couple of researchers under the UC Berkeley Pacific Earthquakes Engineering Research Center. And that report was published in 2010, before the Fukushima accident. I have that study. We reviewed it here. That study was not specific enough to this site. They knew it. After they finished it, they realized it didn't have enough detail. So then they initiated a new one, which is the one we're going to see soon. Okay? So they haven't ignored this. In fact, they've been working on this for some years.
I fully agree. There's no accusation or any assertion from me that, you know, the licensee deliberately ignoring things.
No.
What I'm saying is, as a layman and as a novice in tsunami analysis, I totally rely on expert testimony to guide me, right? And so far, before Mr. Weissman's effort, the expert testimony has been, don't worry, you know, I'm 85 feet high. The biggest one that anybody can expect is only 35 feet, right? Based on that observation, I was persuaded. Sure, you know, you're 85 feet high. Why do you worry about 35 feet?
I completely agree with you. That's what we're going to try to do.
Right. All of a sudden, you know, somebody else came forward and said, no, I had another postulation.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. And there's no question about Sewell's credentials, by the way. He's certainly one of the people that have expertise.
Okay, I'm now submitting the report for approval.
Okay, at this point, we'll entertain public comment.
John Geesman on behalf of the Alliance for Nuclear Responsibility. 3 items. First, I want to be absolutely clear. It was the action of this safety committee in making a Freedom of Information request to the NRC that produced the Sewell report.
Apparently, because the earlier ones didn't work.
And I will tell you, that is the type of misconduct by the NRC which has led to its discredited status among people in California. And I think that all of us owe you a certain debt of thanks for your persistence in seeing that this become public. Sewell did his report in 2003. Wasn't released for 11 years. Inexcusable had there been a tsunami in the intervening period of time.